Ave Maria Purísima. Here we are, another day, and I'm continuing on my talks regarding the life and experiences of Reyes and myself as we moved on to this spiritual life that God led us on. And the last time that I was speaking was, I was telling you about the time when Reyes and I met. And if you remember, I spoke about how he had taken us to this place through his cousin, and we had gone there, we got to know each other, we got to know that his name was Reese, last name was Reese, my last name was Reese. And that started a friendship. During that time, I also used to work in this soda place where they sold the pop for the community and the young people. And in the 1950s, they were all over, and so they were very popular. And because I worked there, he began to come in to speak, to talk, to share conversation. And one of the things that I need to tell you is that during my teen years, I had a very strict mother. My mother didn't let me really share with any male friends as like a boyfriend. So I knew that I would never be able to have him go over to my home as a friend. So the next best thing was for him to go and visit me there at the soda shop that I worked at. So he began to go over there, and while I was not busy, we would sit down, we would talk, got to know each other. He told me about his life. I told him about my life. My life wasn't, I was going to school, and pretty much that was it. For him, he had almost grown up, had a whole lifetime by that time. He had moved out of the house when he was 11 or 12 years old, and he had gone to live with some uncles in Safford, Arizona. By that time, he was almost working. He had worked as a young man in the farms. He had left school at a very early age after he burned his legs severely, and he was out of school for a long time. So he missed school, and in those days they didn't enforce going to school, and so he didn't go back. He finished maybe up to the half of the 5th grade, and then he never went back to school. That caused him then to always have a lifetime of deficiencies in his writing skills and even his speaking skills. He was an eloquent speaker, but that I believe, came strictly from God. But as far as formal learning, he didn't have it. So he told me about all of that. He told me that you know, he had felt lonely during that already during that, up to that time in his life, because when you lose a father, when you lose those people who have raised you, it's a very hard thing. Especially when you're a child, you miss your parents, and for him it was his father. He was the oldest one. He's the one that had that sharing with his father. He had his younger brother, but his younger brother was 3 years younger than him, and he wasn't as close to his father because he was still a baby. And so Reyes was the one that had more sharing with his father. So he told me about all those sad times. And so we began to be really very good friends. He also told me that during those days, right before he met me, he had been thinking, by that time he was 18 years old, and he had been thinking very seriously of joining. I think he had already signed up to be called for the service for the armed forces, and he was just waiting to be called. And it was kind of like a sad thing because we just barely got to know each other. But I think in a way it was also a good thing because I was very young. I was only 15 years old. And I still had to finish school. I still had a lot of things that I had to do and grow up, really. And so in a way it was kind of like better because he was going to be leaving for about 3 years. He was joining the service. Didn't know what was up ahead for him. And but we promised each other that we would communicate by means of letters, and we did. So he left, I think about 6 months after I met him. They called him and he left. And it was during that time, the next 3 years, I really did not, the only sharing that I did with him was sharing through mail. And most of the time that wasn't very in-depth because they had sent him right away to Korea where the conflict was really strong at that time. And so he was up there and didn't really have a lot of time to write long letters. He was also not a writer, which he didn't like to do. And so he just wrote very often, but he just wrote very superficial things. He'd send me pictures. I would send him pictures. But we promised that when he got back that we would resume our friendship. And by that time, it was more, we were more interested in having a relationship of love. And so he left. I remained at home, went to school, finished, graduated from high school. By that time, he came back, and he was here for about a year, still traveling around. He was not settled at all. He still needed to find himself. And so almost a year went by before we decided that we wanted to live the rest of our lives together. So when we finally decided, by that time I was 19 years old, was out of high school, and he was out of the service, settled down. And so we decided to get married. So himself and his mother and his stepfather had came over to my home. I can tell you that my mother was not really happy that I was thinking of getting married because she had had other plans for me. I was the only daughter, the youngest of all my family. I had 3 older brothers, and she had wanted me to go do some other things, you know, get a little profession. She said maybe you can go to school for doing hair or something like that. I guess that was about the only thing we could think of, higher education. But of course I had my heart set on getting married, and there was nothing that was going to change that. So my mother said, all right. I was 19 years old by that time. She knew that really once you have your heart set on things, young people are going to do what they're going to do, and I was no different. And so we decided, we set the date for August the 27th of 1955. And we began to plan for that day. We had a big wedding. We had bridesmaids, and we had best men, and the little flower girls, and we had the little boys that accompany the flower girls, and we planned a very beautiful big wedding, and that's what we had. We were poor families. We were not rich, but Reyes had worked and saved some money, and it was through that we were able to have this beautiful wedding, you know, with my white dress and at the church, and a big celebration. And we began our lives together. I think that because we had become good friends first, we were able to then go into the marriage. You know, for those of you who have never been married, and for those of you who have, you know that marriage is not an easy thing. It's all very beautiful when you first saying, I want to be married, but once you're married, then you know, you don't even understand that you're going into a relationship where there will be struggles. And you know, for those of you who have experienced it, it is. And for those of you who have not experienced it, it is. So those are the things that we have to think about. However, we got married, and we began our life together, living together as man and wife. I can say that the first 5 years were a hard 5 years, as I think most marriages are. And so we were going to have to learn how to deal with each other.